I cannot believe that the last time I sat down to film a video was my October reading wrap-up, and now I'm sitting down to film my November reading wrap-up. A short explanation: I did post this on community. My 2 children caught the dreaded virus, and the result of that was a whole lot of chaos, and I just didn't have the capacity or the time to film, edit and upload anything. I did start and stop a number of vlogs, but yeah, the ensuing chaos was just a little bit much. So I can't believe that we're at the end of November. I can't believe that it's been so long since I've filmed anything, but despite everything that went on, I did have a pretty good reading month in November. I read 7 books in total, so without further ado, let's jump in and start talking about them. The first book that I read was The Book Club by CJ Cooper. This is a mystery thriller set in a quiet English country village, and a young woman called Alice moves into the village, and in order to make friends she suggests to a group of people that they start a book club. Turns out that every member of the book club has some kind of secret that they want to keep hidden, and through the books that Alice chooses for them to read, these secrets begin to come to light. And then it transpires that Alice has a revenge vendetta against one of these people in particular, and I really don't want to say any more about the story than that, because as with this type of genre, the less you know, the better. I liked this book. I gave it 3 stars. I will say that had I not been in the right frame of mind to read it, I can see that I wouldn't have liked it as much as I did. This is the type of book where none of the characters are particularly likable. Our main character in particular is a wet blanket for the majority of the story, and I felt that the whole revenge vendetta between Alice and one of our characters was laboured over an awful lot, which made the pacing of the book quite slow at times. You know, you catch on very quickly as a reader that there is something more going on, and you didn't necessarily need to be reminded of it all the way through the book. So yeah, it did throw the pacing off a little bit, but it was a solid mystery thriller. I liked it enough to keep going. As I said, I gave it 3 stars. I enjoyed it. I do see how you would need to be in the right frame of mind to read it, but yeah, I thought that it was okay. The next book that I picked up was The Eye of the World. This is the first book in Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time series, a 14-book fantasy series which has suddenly exploded everywhere on social media thanks to the Amazon Prime adaptation of these books. This is a series that James has been asking me for well over a year to pick up and read, but it just felt like such a huge undertaking. 14 books, and every single one of them is this size. It just felt like such a huge undertaking for a series that I didn't know if I was going to love, or, you know, that's where we were. But I did want to watch the adaptation, and I did want to have some understanding of the world and the magic system and the rules, etc, etc. So I thought that I would pick up the first book before the series was released, and then if I wanted to carry on at a later point I could. I think the first series is books 1, 2 and 3. So there probably is some spoilers, but it's very much an interpretation of the books rather than a direct lift of the books. So on to the actual book that I read. I posted my review of this book on Instagram and made a few comments, and immediately got some messages from people correcting my mistakes and correcting what I had said. So I apologise if I say something that you disagree with. I know this has a very strong fan base, so if I say something that's incorrect or that you don't like, then I apologise. It's only my opinion. So as I said, these are fantasy books. It's basically Robert Jordan's version of Lord of the Rings, so a journey story. So we have a group of characters who live in an isolated farming village called Two Rivers. One day, an Aes Sedai arrives in the village. Aes Sedai are revered and feared women who are able to wield the magic system in this book called the One Power. Shortly after the arrival of the Aes Sedai, an army of dark creatures attack the village, and our band of characters are forced to flee with the Aes Sedai, and thus their adventuring begins. I found this book to be quite slow. If I thought that Robin Hobb's books were slow, this really pushes them out of the way in terms of progression. Whilst our characters do have some trials and tribulations, whilst they do face some minor peril, and I can definitely see where their character story, their progression is going to go, not that much happens in this book to say that it is over 800 pages long. It's all about the world building, it's all about meeting our characters, understanding our magic system-ish, and really I feel like this is just dipping your toe in the water of all that the world and the magic system and the story is going to be, and it feels now even more like a massive undertaking to read the rest of the books, because yeah, I feel like we've only just skimmed the surface with this book. And it's funny because I think if this was the first book in an unfinished series, I probably wouldn't want to pick up any more of the books. It's only because I've got James and people who really like the books saying to me it gets better, that I would then want to carry on with them. I'm sorry it's gone really dark. It's suddenly started absolutely lashing it down. I don't know if you can hear that. Hopefully you can still see me. So yeah, I mean, I thought it was okay. There were enjoyable elements. I thought it was very readable. I liked our characters. I liked the setup. I liked the world building. I liked the inkling that it gave me of what is to come. I gave it 3.5 stars. It didn't blow me out of the water. As I say, the pacing is incredibly slow. If you like plot-driven books, this is not going to tick the box for you. Will I carry on with the rest of the books? I hope so. I'm not going to make any promises. I definitely enjoyed the adaptation more than I enjoyed this book, so we will see. Then I picked up Witherward by Hannah Matthewson. I was quite annoyed because when I picked this up I thought that it was a standalone fantasy book, and it was only when I finished it and went to review it on Goodreads and saw it described as book number 1 that I realised it's actually probably part of a bigger series that's coming. So that was frustrating because I was trying not to start any more fantasy series. So this is a world where we have 2 Londons. We are not given a specific time period, but the way that the normal London is described very much gave me Victorian style vibes. So that's how I pictured it. So we have the Victorian London, and then we have an almost direct reflection of that London called Witherward. The difference being that within Witherward we have people with magical abilities split into different factions. So for example, our main character Ilsa is a shapeshifter. We have people who can use psychokinetic abilities, we have seers, etc, etc, and all of these different factions are basically on the brink of civil war. Our main character Ilsa has lived in normal London for the last 17 years and is completely unaware that Witherward exists. She knows about her abilities, but she doesn't really know how to harness them or use them to their fullest capacity. And she very much has to try and keep them hidden because, as you might expect in everyday society, someone shifting into a bird is likely to get them locked up or terrify people. And then one day Ilsa is kidnapped and taken to Witherward, and her eyes are basically opened to this whole other world that exists with people like her. This is very much an enjoyable fantasy adventure story. It has dark elements, it has a love interest, it has betrayal. I really liked it. Very accessible, it's very easy to read. I would have perhaps liked a little bit more world building and character development, whether that's going to come in the later books that I didn't know existed when I was reading this one, and I don't think have actually been released yet even. Yeah, I would have liked that a little bit more, but on the whole this was a very enjoyable book. I gave it 4 stars. I liked the concept, I liked the characters, I liked the setting. I'm very excited to see how the author is going to take and develop the story. Now I know that there is the potential that future books will exist. On the whole, a very enjoyable fantasy adventure story. Sometimes when you pick up a book, you go in with a certain expectation of what it's going to be like, and then it is just something completely different, but despite that it hits all the right notes, and that was very much my reading experience with Starfish by Akemi Dawn Bowman. This is a YA. We have our main character Kiko, who suffers with social anxiety, and she also has a narcissistic mother, which has left a deep impression on Kiko and her 2 siblings and has long-standing repercussions for all 3 of them. Art is basically Kiko's life. She has always dreamt of being accepted into a very prestigious art school called Prism, which will basically give her the ability to do what she loves, but also to escape her mother. When she doesn't get accepted into Prism and her life has to go on a different path to the one that she anticipated, Kiko has to learn to come to terms with that. This is just a really heartwarming story and reflection on discovering who we are, discovering what true family means, and also the power behind telling our own stories and not hiding behind what we think other people want to hear. There were some plot points which dragged, and the constant reminder about Kiko's narcissistic mother and the impact that that had, it did drag in places, which meant that the pacing felt a little bit slow. But on the whole, I really enjoyed this. I gave it 4.5 stars. I thought it was extremely relatable, extremely readable. I liked the culture, I liked Kiko, I liked her character development, I liked the side characters. I liked that there was that little bit of predictability, but also ultimately, yeah, it was just really heartwarming. I really enjoyed it. Highly recommend it. I'm going to talk about the next 2 books together because they're books 1 and 2 in a series, so even though I read a book in between reading these 2, it makes sense to kind of bundle it all together. So first up we have An Ember in the Ashes by Sabaa Tahir, and then I read the second one, Torch Against the Night. These are the first 2 books in the Ember Quartet by this author. They are YA fantasy with a very Romanesque inspired setting, even down to the names that we have. We have marshals and plebeians, there's an emperor. It's very heavily Roman inspired, and I thoroughly enjoyed them. So we have our main character Leia, who is part of the scholar caste. The scholars are basically the lowest of the low. They are the slaves. They are expendable. They are nobodies in this world. And when Leia's brother Darren is accused of being a spy for the scholar rebels and is imprisoned, Leia's whole world gets turned upside down. She runs away when he is captured, and as a result she feels this great sense of guilt, and she decides that she is going to go and free her brother. So she approaches the rebel movement and basically offers herself and says she'll do whatever in exchange for them helping her to free her brother from where he is imprisoned. We read from 2 different perspectives. So we read from Leia's perspective, and then there is also another group in this world known as masks. They are essentially highly trained assassins and killing machines. So they attend a school called Blackcliff. They go from being very young. They endure all kinds of awful horrors designed to toughen them up, and then eventually what you're left with is these honed deadly killers. And so we read from the perspective of one of the masks as well, called Elias, and as you might expect, Leia and Elias's paths eventually cross. This book took me a while to get into. It has a very modern and progressive writing style, but paired with the Roman historical setting, and then also you get an injection of these mythological, magical creatures such as Jinn and Efrits and Seers, and the 3 different elements didn't gel for me to begin with, and I actually found the reading experience quite jarring. Once I was into the story, I was into the story. Obviously can't say too much about book 2 because it's a continuation of book 1, but there were several hefty plot twists in this book that I did not see coming. I absolutely flew through it. I really wanted to know what the outcome was, and even though I'm filming this on the 1st of December, I had fully intended to start reading only Christmas books from the 1st of December. I've actually started A Reaper at the Gates, which is book 3, because I just want to know what is going to happen in the end. So yeah, thoroughly enjoyed them. I will say, for YA books, they are a little bit dark. For example, rape culture is discussed quite a lot in terms of things like the masks just accept that they will rape the slaves, and that's discussed very freely, very openly, just almost quite casually. So do be aware that it does have some darker elements, and obviously there's a lot of talk about death and the treatment of the lesser classes of society as well. So just something to be aware of. It probably sits closer to, like, thinking about the fact that my daughter would be at the very entry level of YA. I don't think that these books would be suitable for her, so probably it sits at the older end. But yeah, I really enjoyed them. I want to know what's going to happen. Sabata here has introduced a number of interesting plot points that I want to know how she's going to conclude them, so we will see. And the final book that I'm going to talk about was, I'm so sorry about the lighting and how dark it is, by the way. The final book that I'm going to talk about was my book club's pick for the month. My book club is just one more page. If you're interested in joining in the new year, I will leave a link to it down below. It's a great group. I thoroughly enjoy our live discussions every month. They just all crack me up, and this month was no different. So the book that we picked was Mystery in White by J. Jefferson Fargion. This is a classic crime story. We have a group of people travelling on a train in the snow. Due to the weather, the train stops. The people make the decision to get off the train. They find a house and they take shelter in the house. There is a fire burning merrily in the grate. There is a tea service set out, but there is nobody in sight, and then a couple of murders occur, and thus begins our little crime adventure. I found this really entertaining. This was another one that I listened to primarily on audiobook, and I would highly recommend the audiobook. I don't know whether the intention was for the story to be humorous, but it certainly had laugh out loud elements for me. I was chuckling for the vast majority of the story. The dialogue between our characters in particular is incredibly witty and sharp, and as I say, I just found the whole thing very entertaining. Whether that was the intention or not, I'm not sure. We do have a slight paranormal element to it, which in our discussions came up that it's interesting that the author doesn't fully commit to the paranormal element. It's just this sense of something other, and I think as readers you're very much left to make your own interpretation on what really is going on. We have our amateur sleuth in the form of Mr. Maltby, one of the characters, and he really drives the story forward as we begin to uncover what really is going on. As I say, on the whole, I really enjoyed it. Whether it was meant to be as humorous as it was, I'm not sure, but I found it thoroughly entertaining. I gave it 4 stars. I personally would highly recommend, and I would particularly recommend the audio version of this because I thought it was great. So there you go. They are all the books that I read in the month of November. As I said, I had a very good reading month. Once I have finished A Reaper at the Gates, I will be moving on to only festive Christmas feel-good books. So there'll be a slight jarring in my December wrap-up because I'll obviously read A Reaper at the Gates, and then the tone and theme of my books will change entirely. So do watch out for that. Do let me know what your favourite read was in the month of November. I always love to chat more with you in the comments. I hope that you are all keeping safe and well and getting ready for Christmas. Take care, and I'll see you all soon.